Welcome to our deep dive into the world of flight. We're going to be looking at Principles of Flight,
Yeah,
a textbook for pilot training.
that's right.
So we're talking about the core knowledge needed to understand how planes actually work.
And this deep dive will
Yeah.
give you a grasp of all the forces at play.
Exactly. Get ready for some serious aha moments because we're going to break down lift. So to get a plane off the ground, we need a force powerful enough to overcome its inertia.
That's right.
And it takes even more force to keep it flying and counteract gravity,
Right.
especially when you have a plane full of passengers and luggage.
Absolutely. To keep it flying, we need forces to counteract both gravity and drag.
Okay.
And Newton's second law
Yeah.
comes into play when we think about how much force is needed to produce a certain acceleration.
Okay.
It states that the force acting on an object is equal to its mass times its acceleration.
So a heavier plane needs more force to accelerate,
Yeah.
which explains those really powerful engines.
You got it. We need engines strong enough to generate thrust,
Yeah.
which is the force that propels the plane forward.
Okay.
And that thrust needs to be greater than the drag acting on the aircraft for it to accelerate and take off.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So how about staying up in the air once the plane is moving fast enough?
Okay.
That's where lift comes in, right?
Exactly. This is where Newton's third law, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, is
Right.
key.
Okay.
This means when the wings of an aircraft deflect air downwards,
Yeah.
the air pushes back up on the wings.
So the wings are pushing air down, and the air is pushing the wings and the whole plane up.
That's it.
It's like an invisible trampoline for the plane.
That's a great analogy.
To understand how that lift is generated,
Right?
we need to talk about the atmosphere and some key terms.
Absolutely.
How can something as light as air support a massive plane?
That's where the concept of air density comes in.
Okay.
Air might seem weightless.
Right. It feels like almost nothing.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine it holding up a plane.
But it has mass and therefore weight.
Okay.
And crucially, that density changes with altitude.
So the higher you go,
Yeah.
the thinner the air gets.
Exactly. As altitude increases, both air pressure and temperature decrease,
Okay.
which leads to a decrease in density.
And how does that affect the plane?
It has a huge impact
Okay.
as air density decreases.
Yeah.
So does the amount of lift generated by the wings?
Okay.
This means aircraft need longer runways for takeoff and landing at higher altitudes.
Makes sense. That explains why flights leaving from Denver
Yes.
always seem to need such a long runway.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, another factor that can affect air density is humidity.
Okay.
Did you know that humid air is actually less dense than dry air?
Hold on. You're telling me that humid air is lighter?
It is.
How does that work?
It has to do with the molecular weight of water vapor compared to the gases that make up dry air.
Right.
Water vapor is lighter than nitrogen and oxygen,
Okay.
which are the main components of dry air.
Mm-hmm.
So when water vapor is present,
Yeah.
it displaces some of those heavier molecules,
Okay.
resulting in lower overall density.
Interesting. So on a humid day, an aircraft might actually need a slightly longer takeoff run.
Precisely. And this is where the International Standard Atmosphere, or ILSA, comes in.
Okay.
It's a model that defines the average properties of the atmosphere at different altitudes. So it makes it easier to compare and predict aircraft performance,
It's exactly.
like a common language.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now back to how a plane stays up in the air.
Okay.
To understand lift, we need to delve into the concept of airflow.
All right, so tell me about airflow.
Okay.
What's happening to the air as it flows over the wings?
There are two main types of airflow:
Okay.
streamline and turbulent flow.
Yep.
Streamline flow is when air molecules flow smoothly and in an orderly pattern over the wings.
I'm picturing those wind tunnel visualizations
Exactly like that.
where you see the smoke flowing over a car in perfect lines.
Yes. This smooth flow is what we want for most of the flight because it produces the least amount of drag.
Okay.
Turbulent flow, on the other hand, is when the airflow becomes more chaotic and unpredictable.
So we want to minimize drag
Absolutely.
to make the plane more fuel efficient
Yes.
and to improve performance.
Now, to understand how lift is generated, we need to talk about two important principles: Bernoulli's theorem and the equation of continuity.
Okay, those sound a bit intimidating.
Imagine you have a garden hose with water flowing through it.
Okay.
If you pinch the hose slightly,
Yeah.
the water speeds up in that narrow section.
Yeah, it comes out with more force, like when you're trying to spray someone further away.
That's because the same amount of water has to pass through a smaller space in the same amount of time.
Right.
That's essentially what the equation of continuity tells us.
Okay.
When the area through which a fluid flows decreases,
Uh-huh.
the speed of the fluid must increase.
Okay, I get that. But how does this relate to airflow over a wing?
The curved upper surface of the wing is like the pinched part of the hose.
Okay.
Because of the shape of the wing, the airflow has to speed up over the top surface
Right.
compared to the flatter bottom surface.
So we're creating that same pinched hose effect with the wing design.
You got it.
Okay.
And this is where Bernoulli's theorem comes into play.
Okay.
It states that as the speed of a fluid increases, its pressure decreases.
So faster air means less pressure.
Yes. So as the air speeds up over the top surface of the wing, its pressure decreases.
Okay.
At the same time, the airflow underneath the wing is relatively slower,
Yeah.
so the pressure there is higher.
So you have higher pressure underneath.
Yes.
And lower pressure above.
Exactly.
And that difference creates lift.
This difference in pressure creates an upward force.
It's so counterintuitive. You think faster air, more pressure,
Right.
but it's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
It's wild.
And that difference in pressure is significantly affected by something called the angle of attack.
Angle of attack, what's that?
It's the angle between the oncoming airflow and the chord line of the wing.
Okay.
Think of it as the tilt of the wing relative to the direction the plane is moving.
So if the pilot tilts the wing up more,
Yeah.
does that mean more lift?
Increasing the angle of attack does generally increase the lift generated, but only to a point. If you tilt the wing too much, the airflow can't follow the curve of the wing anymore. And that's when a stall happens.
Too much tilt, and the air can't stick to the wing anymore.
Exactly. But that's something we'll dive deeper into later.
Okay.
For now, just remember that the angle of attack plays a crucial role in how much lift is generated.
So the shape of the wing, the speed of the airflow, the angle of attack, they all work together to create lift.
Yes, and it's worth mentioning that the pressure distribution over the wing is not uniform.
Okay.
The total lift force acts on a specific point on the wing called the center of pressure.
Right.
Understanding where this point is and how it moves is critical for controlling the aircraft.
Which sounds like a perfect segue into our next topic.
Yes.
Controlling the aircraft.
Right.
What are the main control surfaces on a plane?
Okay.
And how do they work?
There are 3 primary flight controls.
Okay.
The elevators, the rudder, and the ailerons.
Okay.
The elevators are located on the tailplane, and they control the pitch of the aircraft.
The pitch, so there's an up and down movement of the nose.
That's right.
Wait, so if I pull back on that joystick,
Yeah.
it's actually the tail that's moving.
Think of it like a seesaw.
Okay.
When you pull back on the control column,
Yeah.
it raises the elevators, which pushes the tail down
Okay.
and makes the nose go up.
Got it.
Pushing the control column forward does the opposite,
Yeah.
lowering the elevators and making the nose pitch down.
Now, what about turning left or right?
Okay.
That's where the rudder comes in, right?
You got the rudder is the vertical control surface on the tail fin,
Okay.
and it controls the yaw of the aircraft.
The yaw.
Yeah, the movement of the nose left or right.
So it's like a boat's rudder,
Exactly.
helping to steer the plane.
Pressing the left rudder pedal swings the rudder to the left, yawing the nose left.
Okay.
Pressing the right pedal does the opposite.
So the elevators control up and down. The
Yeah.
rudder controls left and right.
Uh-huh.
What about tilting the wings to make the plane turn?
That's where the ailerons come in.
Okay.
They're located on the outer trailing edges of the wings.
When you move the control wheel to the left,
Yeah.
the left aileron goes up and the right aileron goes down.
Okay.
This creates more lift on the right wing and less lift on the left wing,
Got it.
causing the aircraft to roll to the left.
So we have elevators for pitch rudder, for yaw, and ailerons for roll.
That's right.
It's amazing how these simple movements can control such a complex machine.
Right.
But I imagine it takes a lot of force to move those control surfaces,
You're absolutely right.
especially at high speeds.
That's why aircraft designers came up with ways to achieve aerodynamic balance.
Okay, how do they do that?
One method is the horn balance,
Okay.
where a small portion of the control surface sticks out in front of the hinge line. This creates an aerodynamic force that helps to balance the force of the airflow on the control surface,
Okay.
making it easier for the pilot to move.
So it's all about balancing the forces
Exactly.
to make the controls more manageable for the pilot.
And another method is using tabs.
Small adjustable surfaces on the trailing edge of the main control surfaces.
Yeah.
They help to fine-tune the control forces and to trim the aircraft for level flight.
So if the plane is slightly nose heavy,
Yeah,
you can adjust the trim tab on the elevator to balance it out.
exactly.
And some larger aircraft even have powered flying controls,
They do.
where hydraulic systems are used to move the control surfaces.
That's right.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like having power steering for an airplane.
It is.
But wouldn't that make it harder for the pilot to feel how the aircraft is responding?
That's a great point. You're right, it would.
Yeah.
That's why aircraft with powered flying controls often have artificial feel systems built in.
Okay.
These systems simulate the aerodynamic forces that the pilot would normally feel.
So they're getting the feel of manually moving the control surfaces,
Yeah.
even though a hydraulic system is actually doing the work.
That's right.
Fascinating. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
let's talk about flaps and slats. I know they have something to do with lift,
They do.
but how do they work?
Flaps and slats are incredibly important. They
Yeah.
enhance lift, especially during takeoff and landing.
When the aircraft needs to fly at lower speeds,
Exactly.
makes sense. At lower speeds, there's less airflow over the wings. So you need something to help the plane stay airborne.
Right.
How do these flaps work?
Trailing edge flaps are the most common type.
Okay.
Imagine the wings changing shape to grab more air during takeoff and landing.
Right.
That's essentially what flaps do.
So they're kind of like extending the wings to get more lift at slower speeds.
You got it.
Okay.
They're hinged sections on the trailing edge of the wing that can be extended downwards to increase the wing's surface area.
What about leading edge flaps and slats?
Okay.
How do they differ from trailing edge flaps?
Leading edge flaps and slats, which are located on the front of the wing,
Okay.
primarily work to prevent a stall,
Okay.
particularly during takeoff and landing.
Got it.
They help keep the airflow smoothly attached to the wing, even when the wing is tilted up at a steep angle.
So they're like little helters that keep the air flowing smoothly over the wing so it can generate lift.
That's a good way to think about it.
Oh.
And this is particularly important during takeoff and landing when the aircraft is operating at lower speeds
Right.
and higher angles of attack.
It's amazing how these relatively simple devices can enhance the lift generated by the wings.
And what's even more fascinating
Yeah.
is how all these elements,
Right.
Newton's laws,
Yeah.
airflow,
Yeah.
Bernoulli's principle,
Yeah.
control surfaces, flaps and slats,
Yeah.
all work together to make controlled flight possible.
It's like a perfectly choreographed dance
Exactly.
with all these different forces working together.
It's a true testament to human ingenuity and
Yeah.
our understanding of the forces of nature.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We have.
I'm ready for even more aha moments.
Let's take a deeper breath and come back to explore some even more intriguing aspects of flight.
Right.
We'll unravel the mystery of stalling and see what happens when we break the sound barrier.
Okay. I'm excited.
Yeah.
All right. We're back and ready to tackle a topic that makes me think of those dramatic movie scenes.
Yeah.
Stalling.
Oh, yeah.
It's something pilots train for extensively.
Right.
But can you explain what causes a stall?
So stalling all comes down to that angle of attack we talked about earlier.
Okay.
The angle between the wing and the oncoming airflow.
Right.
When the angle of attack gets too steep,
Yeah.
the smooth airflow over the wing's upper surface breaks away.
So instead of smoothly flowing over the wing, the air starts to separate
That's right.
and become turbulent.
Yeah, and that smooth flow is what creates that pressure difference that generates lift.
Okay.
When that smooth airflow is disrupted, lift decreases and the aircraft starts to descend.
So that's what we call a stall.
That's a stall.
I think there's a common misconception that stalling is all about going too slow.
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
But it's more about the angle of the wing and how the air is flowing over it.
You're absolutely right. While a stall is more likely to occur at lower speeds,
Okay.
it's not solely dependent on airspeed.
Right.
It's primarily triggered by exceeding that critical angle of attack,
Okay.
that point where the air can no longer follow the curve of the wing.
I'm curious, what are some of the things that affect the stall speed of an aircraft?
Lots of factors come into play,
Okay.
including the aircraft's weight, load factor, and the use of flaps.
So those flaps we talked about earlier,
Yeah,
which give the wing more lift at lower speeds,
right.
they also play a role in stalling.
Exactly. Flaps help to lower the stalling speed,
Okay.
but they also change how the wing stalls.
So pilots need to be very aware of how flaps affect both lift and stall characteristics.
Absolutely. And the shape of the wing itself is another key factor.
Okay.
Different wing designs have different stalling characteristics.
Right.
Swept wing aircraft, which
Yeah.
you see on most jetliners, have a tendency for something called tip stall.
Tip stall, what is that?
It means that the wing tips stall before the root of the wing,
Okay.
which can be dangerous because it can lead to a sudden loss of control.
Because if one wingtip stalls before the other,
Yeah,
it would make the plane suddenly roll in that direction.
exactly. That's why aircraft designers incorporate features like washout to prevent tip stall.
Washout.
Imagine the wings are very slightly twisted.
Okay.
So the angle of attack is a little lower at the wingtips.
Got it.
This subtle twist helps to ensure that the wing root stalls before the tip.
So it stalls in a more controlled way.
Exactly, giving the pilot more time to react.
It's fascinating how they're designing the wing to stall in a way that gives the pilot more control.
And some aircraft also have stall strips on the wings.
Stall strips, what are those for?
They're small devices placed on the leading edge of the wing.
Okay.
They help to keep the airflow attached to the wing at higher angles of attack.
So it's kind of like adding tiny bumps to make the air stick to the wings better?
That's a good way to think about it. And many larger aircraft even have stall warning systems that detect the onset of a stall and alert the pilot.
Like alarm?
Sort of like stick shakers that vibrate the control column.
So it's like the plane is saying, hey, wake up, pilot, we're about to stall.
Exactly. Those warning systems are crucial for giving the pilot time to take corrective action and prevent a dangerous situation.
This has been a really eye-opening look at stalling.
Yeah.
It's a complex event.
It is.
But you've helped me understand the science behind it.
Good.
Now let's shift gears and talk about stability.
Okay.
What does it mean for an aircraft to be stable?
Imagine a plane encountering a disturbance, like a gust of wind.
Yeah.
A stable aircraft has a natural tendency to return to its original position if it gets jostled around.
So if the wind pushes the nose up, a stable aircraft will naturally want to pitch back down.
Exactly. It wants to return to equilibrium like a pendulum swinging back to the center.
Okay.
There are actually different types of stability.
Okay.
Static stability is the immediate response after a disturbance.
Okay.
Dynamic stability is about the aircraft's motion as it settles back down over time.
So static stability is about the initial reaction.
Yeah.
And dynamic stability is about how the plane returns to level flight.
That's right. And we also need to talk about stability in different directions.
Right. Longitudinal stability, directional stability, and lateral stability.
Yeah.
I'm guessing longitudinal stability is about the pitch axis.
You got it.
Those up and down movements of the nose.
Longitudinal stability is largely determined by the location of the center of gravity and the design of the tailplane.
So if the weight distribution is off 4, the aircraft could be unstable.
Precisely, if the center of gravity is too far back,
Right.
the plane could have a tendency to pitch up or down uncontrollably.
Yeah, that would be bad.
That's why weight and balance calculations are so important.
What about directional stability?
That's about the yaw axis. The left and right movements of the nose. Think of the vertical tail fin like a weather vane, helping to keep the nose pointed into the wind.
So a bigger tail fin means more stability in yaw.
You got it. And finally, we have lateral stability, which is about roll. It's the plane's tendency to return to a wings-level attitude if one wing dips.
So if a gust of wind causes one wing to drop, a stable aircraft will naturally want to roll back to level.
Exactly. Lateral stability is influenced by things like the dihedral, the upward angle of the wings, and the position of the center of gravity.
It's amazing how all these design elements contribute to the plane's stability.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
But are there ever situations where a plane might become unstable?
Yes. Certain flight conditions and maneuvers can challenge stability. One example is what happens when one engine fails on a multi-engine aircraft.
That sounds like a very serious situation.
It can be.
Yeah.
When one engine fails, the thrust is no longer symmetrical, and it creates a yawing moment that wants to turn the aircraft toward the dead engine.
So the plane would naturally want to turn towards the engine that's not working.
Yes. And the rudder plays a critical role in counteracting that yawing moment. The pilot needs to use the rudder to keep the plane flying straight.
So it's a balancing act between the rudder and the remaining engine.
Exactly. There's also something called VMCA.
VMCA.
The minimum control speed with one engine inoperative.
So that's the minimum speed the plane needs to maintain to have enough rudder control to stay airborne with one engine out.
Precisely. And this is just one example of how flight conditions can challenge stability. Understanding these challenges is crucial for safety.
This has been a fascinating look at aircraft stability.
It is a really interesting area.
It's remarkable how these planes can be so stable in the air.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that stable doesn't mean static.
That's right.
What did you mean by that?
Think about a pilot trying to maintain level flight in windy conditions. A stable plane will generally return to level flight after a gust. But it might oscillate a little as it adjusts to the changing conditions.
So even a stable aircraft is constantly adjusting and reacting to the forces around it.
Exactly. It's a constant interplay between the aircraft's natural stability and the pilot's control inputs.
It's like a dance between the plane and the pilot,
That's a great way to put it.
working together to maintain a smooth flight.
Speaking of challenging conditions,
Yeah?
what happens when we push the limits of speed?
Okay. What are the challenges of supersonic flight?
As an aircraft approaches the speed of sound,
Yeah.
the airflow around it changes dramatically.
Right.
And shock waves begin to form.
Shockwaves. I know they're associated with sonic booms,
Right.
but what are they exactly?
Imagine you dip your hand in water and move it slowly.
Okay.
You create little ripples that spread out.
Right.
But if you move your hand really fast, those ripples can't get out of the way.
Yeah.
And they form a wave in front of your hand.
So shock waves are like waves of compressed air that form when something moves faster than the speed of sound.
That's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
And these shock waves create a lot of drag,
Yeah.
making it much harder to fly at supersonic speeds.
So how can planes fly faster than the speed of sound if shock waves create so much drag?
It requires some incredible engineering.
Yeah.
Swept wings are one of the keys.
Okay.
By angling the wings back,
Mm-hmm.
you reduce the component of airflow that hits the wing head on.
So it's like the wings are cutting through the air more smoothly.
You got other design elements
Yeah.
like a narrow fuselage and something called area ruling.
Area ruling, what is that?
It's a design technique where the aircraft's shape is carefully sculpted
Okay.
to minimize the intensity of shock waves.
It's incredible how they're manipulating the entire shape of the plane to reduce drag at supersonic speeds.
It's all about tricking the airflow, but drag isn't the only challenge.
Right.
Stability and control also become trickier to manage at supersonic speeds.
I can imagine that those shock waves could really disrupt things.
Shock waves can disrupt airflow over control surfaces,
Right.
making them less effective.
Yeah.
And as a plane approaches the speed of sound,
Okay.
it can experience something called Mach tuck.
Mach tuck? What's that?
It's when the aircraft tends to pitch nose down as it gets close to the speed of sound.
Okay.
This happens because the center of pressure on the wings shifts as shock waves form.
So it's like the plane is suddenly getting heavier in the nose.
That's a good analogy, and it can be a challenging situation for pilots to manage.
So supersonic flight is a whole different world when it comes to aerodynamics.
It really is.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive,
We have.
but the atmosphere isn't always calm and predictable.
Right.
I'm really curious to know, how do planes handle flying in bad weather?
That's a great question. From icing to wind shear,
Yeah.
flying in adverse weather brings a whole new set of challenges.
I'm ready to hear about it.
Let's take a break and then come back to explore how pilots navigate those stormy skies.
So let's talk about those stormy skies.
Flying in bad weather is a whole other ballgame.
Right. I'm especially curious about icing conditions.
Yeah.
Ice can make driving a car pretty treacherous.
Yeah.
But what about a plane?
Ice buildup on an aircraft is super dangerous.
Okay.
It disrupts the smooth airflow, which we need for lift.
Yeah.
And it also increases drag.
Less lift, more drag.
Yeah. That's a recipe for disaster.
Not a good combo.
Even a thin layer of ice can significantly impact performance and handling.
So what parts of the plane are most vulnerable?
The leading edges of the wings,
Okay.
the tailplane,
Mm-hmm.
and propellers.
They're most likely to ice up.
Yes. If the temperature is below freezing and there's moisture in the air,
Yeah.
ice can start to build up right where the airflow first hits the aircraft.
So how do planes stay up when it's icy?
That's where de-icing and anti-icing systems come in.
Right.
De-icing removes ice that has already formed, and anti-icing tries to prevent it from forming in the first place.
So it's like defrosting your car windshield versus using those special wiper fluids.
That's a great analogy.
Okay, cool.
Some planes use inflatable rubber boots on the leading edges of the wings and tail,
So they actually inflate to break the ice off.
kind of like squeezing the ice off.
That's interesting.
Others use hot air from the engines,
Oh, wow.
which is routed through the wings to melt the ice.
So they're pumping hot air into the wings to keep them ice-free.
Exactly. And for anti-icing,
Okay.
sometimes they use that same hot air or spray special fluids on critical surfaces to prevent ice from forming.
It's amazing how they've engineered these systems to fight the ice.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
So are there any other weather conditions that pilots have to be extra cautious about?
Wind shear is a big one.
Okay.
It's a sudden shift in wind speed and direction,
Uh-huh.
often associated with thunderstorms
Right.
or those sudden downdrafts called microbursts.
I've heard of those. They're like
Yeah.
invisible waterfalls of air.
That's a good way to put it. They can be incredibly dangerous for planes.
Yeah.
Especially during takeoff and landing.
I can see how a sudden downdraft could be really scary.
Yeah.
Like slam a plane into the ground.
That's why early detection is so important.
Okay.
Weather radar can help pilots see potential wind shear.
Right.
And some planes even have special sensors to detect it.
Oh, wow. So if a pilot sees a microburst on the radar, what do they do?
The best thing to do is avoid it.
So fly around the area?
Yeah, or wait for the conditions to improve.
Okay, so it's all about awareness and making smart decisions.
Exactly.
And pilots really have to be on top of the weather.
Absolutely. And all of this leads us to something called the flight operating envelope.
Okay, the flight operating envelope, what's that?
It's like the safe operating zone for the aircraft.
Okay.
It defines the limits of things like airspeed, altitude, and the forces the plane can handle without getting damaged.
So pushing those limits is a bad idea.
Exceeding the limits can lead to structural damage or loss of control. Pilots use something called a VN diagram to help them stay within the safe zone.
A VN diagram, what's that?
It's a graph that shows the safe combinations of speed and forces that the plane can handle.
Got it.
It's a key tool for pilots.
To stay within the plane's capabilities.
Exactly. There are all sorts of things that can affect the limits,
Yeah.
from the plane's design and weight to the weather conditions.
And pushing those limits can lead to some crazy stuff, right?
Pushing the limits can lead to some pretty strange and dangerous situations.
Okay.
Like something called aileron reversal.
Aileron reversal.
It can happen at very high speeds when the ailerons, the things that control, roll, actually do the opposite of what they're supposed to.
So the pilot tries to roll the plane one way and it rolls the other way.
It can be very disorienting.
That sounds terrifying.
It just goes to show that respecting the aircraft's limits is absolutely essential.
This whole deep dive has been absolutely fascinating.
It's a really cool topic.
I'm in awe of just how complex flight is.
Yeah.
And all the ingenuity that has gone into designing and building these machines that can transport us through the air.
It really is amazing.
But what blows me away even more is how understandable the basic principles of flight are.
Yeah.
Like Newton's laws.
Right.
Bernoulli's principle.
Yeah.
They explain so much about what's happening up there in the sky.
It's a beautiful example of how science can unravel the mysteries of the world around us.
Exactly. So what's next for aviation?
Well, yeah.
We're going to be flying in hypersonic jets or electric planes someday.
That's the big question, isn't it? Whatever the future holds, the basic principles we've discussed will still apply.
Right.
It's a foundation that will continue to guide us.
Awesome. Well, thanks to this deep dive, I'll be looking up at those planes with a whole new appreciation for all the science that makes it all possible.
From first officer to captain, master your airline command course. Are you ready to shatter the skies and take your aviation career to the next level? Whether you're just starting out or aiming for your airline command, Captain James is your ultimate co-pilot for success. With over decades of experience in both the Air Force and top airlines, Captain James has flown everything from fast jets and the P-3 to the Boeing and the Airbus, racking up countless hours in the sky. His unmatched insider knowledge and thrilling cockpit stories are packed into his best-selling Professional Airline Pilot series and his Skycall YouTube podcast. Buckle up. It's time to fly high. What you'll get is the Airline Command Prep course. You will master the technical know-how, the standard operating procedures, and the leadership skills needed to take command of any flight. Next is the Airline Pilot Interview Manual. Nail your interview with insider tips, real-world scenarios, and expert strategies that will make you the top to pick. And finally, aircraft-specific guides that cover 600-plus technical questions for every aircraft. Become a pro on both the Airbus and Boeing. Get ready to impress with your technical knowledge and join Captain James on his Skycall YouTube podcast for exclusive behind-the-scenes access to the aviation world. From interview hacks to emergency handling, airline operations, and real stories from the flight deck. This is your personal seat in the cockpit. It's time to level up your skills and knowledge with expert insights and answers to your most burning aviation questions. Start your journey now with Captain James's books on Amazon Kindle. The QR code is on the screen and the links are below. This is your first-class ticket to a successful aviation career. Become the pilot you were meant to be, with Captain James by your side.